And coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to be joined on the air by Representative Raul Labrador from here in Idaho. And of course, he is a member of that Freedom Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, which have some questions, even about Paul Ryan as a potential Speaker of the House. Details on that in about 10 minutes on the program. So I hope you can stick around for that as well. Did you know there's been a shooting at a Walmart in Allentown, Pennsylvania? Mass shooting, several people dead. You're probably not hearing about it because the shooter involved happened to be a person of color. That happens because many times you have people in media who try to tell you that most of these shooters in these situations are angry white males. But if you actually were to look at the statistics, the percentage-wise actually balances out. Maybe, in fact, it's even more on the side of the shooters being from various minority communities. So you're not hearing much about that. Happened to see that early this morning. Also coming up in a few minutes, Trip Family Medicine, 8:30 this morning, we're talking about flu. We're actually talking about flu prevention. We'll have Russell Singleton in studio with us. He is a physician assistant at Trip Family Medicine, which is, if you didn't know this, it's located right here in Twin Falls on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. In fact, they've been looking for new patients as well as new staff. So if you're a medical professional, why not submit an application? And if you're a patient who'd like to actually see a doctor sometimes without a wait of 2 or 3 weeks, you can actually get into Trip Family Medicine usually within a day or two if you have a need for an appointment. So we want to pass that along. So Russell will be talking with us about flu prevention in the next half hour. You're welcome to join in as well because it's an opportunity to talk to a friend and get some friendly medical advice as well. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley on Top Story this morning. Somewhat of a chilly start to the day. It's 39. Heat came on last night. I did not expect that. But it came on last night, so we're getting used to some of the cooler temperatures, expecting a high somewhere in the low to mid-60s today. Raul Labrador, as I said, is going to be chatting with us in a few minutes. Some of that conversation, if not most of that conversation, will deal with this Paul Ryan situation. Ryan has come forward and said, "Oh, if you want me to be the Speaker of the House, then you're going to have to give me dictatorial powers." I'm not kidding. He has said if he's going to be the next Speaker of the House, then Republicans will not be able to remove him. They have to make that agreement with him, which means then they have no bargaining power with him afterwards. Britt Hume was appearing on television last night. You know him as a former ABC News correspondent, also now works with Fox News, semi-retired, but still offers a great deal of analysis on that work. He joined Megyn Kelly on the Kelly File, and he suggested that this Ryan issue may not be a done deal.
What he said was that he would run for Speaker and would take the job if certain conditions were met, if he could be what he called a unifying figure. Now, unifying figures in the Republican caucus these days are not exactly thick on the ground. They're not exactly coming in the windows. So he was laying down conditions under which he would accept the job. And I think a lot of people in the so-called Freedom Caucus, who are the people that, by uniting and blocking the way, kept Kevin McCarthy from becoming Speaker, expected, I think, that the Speaker candidates would want to come to them and see what they wanted. But Ryan was laying down a list of conditions and said if he could be a unifying figure. So he's not just talking about getting the votes. In fact, he said he didn't want to just be a guy who barely squeaked through with 218 votes. He wants an overwhelming mandate from those people. And basically what he wants is if he's Speaker, he wants those people off his back. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to get that from those people. They're pretty recalcitrant, and a lot of them are responsive to constituents, and I hear from them all the time, who think he's a rhino. And so that being the case, it may well not come to pass.
And in fact, of course, symbol of the Republican Party happens to be an elephant. So for those of you who are perhaps new to this, rhino is an acronym for Republican in name only. There's no actual rhinoceros symbol. It's rhino. It's spelled R-I-N-O, Republican in name only. And in fact, the Drudge Report has a link today that shows that Paul Ryan's conservative rating is just about nil. That is zero, nada. So what would they be getting if they replaced John Boehner with this guy and say, well, all right, he's handsome and all of that. I met Paul Ryan about 25 years ago, I guess it was. Back then, he was actually working for the Oscar Mayer hot dog brand. You're familiar with that, maybe? You're also aware that they have a lot of these giant hot dogs that drive around the country? He was the driver of one of those large hot dogs. It's a great big truck that's shaped to look like a hot dog in a bun. And I used to have to cover a lot of house fires and crime stories, but every once in a while I would get diverted to cover some lighter news. And so I was sent to go cover this story one day about the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile coming into town. And I was standing there with the local mayor and county executive, and all of a sudden we looked up, coming off the highway ramp, happened to be this great big long hot dog, and it drove down the street and it pulled up at the location, and who got out? This young fellow with really dark hair by the name of Paul Ryan. And now he may be Speaker of the House. That should tell us a little bit, shouldn't it, about this man's background and the like. Look, I can squeeze in a caller very, very quickly here, but then we have to get into a break because we have to get Congressman Labrador on the air on the other side of the break. We have a caller with us. You're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
I don't understand how come you guys want somebody more conservative than Paul Ryan when he's an Ayn Rand ideologue, which he just praises the rich and takes away from the poor.
Maybe because conservatives don't want to praise the rich all the time. We want a fair shake, too. Thanks much for the call. We're in the middle of a break. Raul, Labrador coming up in just a moment. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And it's a warm 39 here in the Miami of the North today. As I mentioned earlier, we are joined this morning by Congressman Raul Labrador, one of our two representatives here in the state of Idaho, and we're hoping to have this become a regular appearance on a monthly basis. It's 8:15. You're listening to Bill Colley this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, we're up to 40. I guess that's considered to be good news. First of all, we'll get right to our business, though, and Congressman, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be on your show.
I think the last time you were here, we were talking about Rand Paul. But since then, some other issues have obviously taken center stage, and we've just been chatting off the top of the program today about Paul Ryan. And after getting out of bed this morning and looking at the Drudge Report while I was having my breakfast, I get the impression that this is not necessarily going to go over well with a great many of you in the Freedom Caucus.
You know, right now we're listening to him. I don't always try to make a rush to judgment because he said some things last night that I have some questions about. So today at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to meet with him. The Freedom Caucus invited him to come talk to us, and he can explain exactly what he meant. Some of the things he said were actually really good. He wants to go back to regular order. You know, some of the demands that we have been making, and I think you've been following this as well as anybody, our demands are pretty simple. We want the House to run like a legislature. We want to make sure that the committee process works. We want to make sure that individual members can offer amendments, that we have the opportunity to debate our issues. And, whether we win or lose, we want to have the free opportunity to actually debate the issues. He says that he's with us on that. But some of the other things he said we were not as excited about, so we want to make sure that we understand exactly where he's coming from.
I know that I heard some discussion in the last couple of weeks, and I think I was listening to one of the network shows, and I heard comments from you where you were saying that you still support Daniel Webster.
Yes.
And a lot of people out there seem to feel like, if you're listening to mainstream media, it seems that they've forgotten that he even exists at this point.
Well, that has been one of the most disappointing things about this process is that, last night Paul Ryan was given an opportunity to speak, and I was waiting for them to give Daniel Webster an opportunity to speak. There's still other declared candidates for the speakership. And that's what's happening here in Washington. And our leadership here seems to have a complete misunderstanding of what's happening out there in the real world. If you look at the polling data, 62% of the Republican Party feels that we have betrayed them in Washington, D.C. About that same number of people are supporting outside candidates, like Donald Trump, like Carson, like Fiorina, and Ted Cruz, who, even though he's a member of Congress, he's seen as an outsider. There's all these things happening, and it's almost like the members of Congress are still tone deaf, and they don't understand that there's a huge level of frustration in the Republican Party. And what we're doing in the Freedom Caucus is we're trying to reflect that frustration because we're just as frustrated as people are. Sometimes we have to take a little different tactical approach than some of our members. Some of our friends back in Idaho want us to just burn down the house, and that's not that's just not going to happen. But we are making some huge changes. If you look at what we've done over the last 2 weeks, it's unprecedented. This hasn't happened. There was an article here recently that said What the Freedom Caucus is doing hasn't happened in 100 years in the House of Representatives. So I'm proud of what we have done. I feel good about what we have done, but we have to continue to work on a step-by-step approach to make sure that we get to somebody, whoever the new speaker is going to be, is somebody who's going to listen to the people and listen to the individual members of Congress instead of telling us, instead of lecturing us. They're actually going to listen.
Our guest this morning is Congressman Raul Labrador from here in Idaho. We're at 39 and coming up on 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. We have the congressman for about 5 more minutes. You mentioned that there are some people who'd like to see that, just burn down the House. There's a headline today from Eric Erickson. Paul Ryan wants House conservatives to sign their own death warrant. And I guess that's the divide, is that the two sides have to come to understand what the other side needs. And there are 40 of you, and in 2 years or next year after the election, there may be 60 or 70.
Yes.
That they've got to realize this is a growing movement.
Oh, it is a growing movement, and it's reflective of what's happening out there in the electorate. And I think that's what Paul. Hopefully today, when we talk to Paul, he gets to understand that he can't just come in and dictate to us, but that we are willing. We're looking for somebody who can lead the conference. We're looking for somebody who can actually bring us together, because we have major issues in the world that we have to deal with. And I would rather spend the next 14 months of my term actually trying to come up with solutions and figuring out how we can defeat the bad ideas of the president and his party instead of the infighting that we have had. But what's happening here is that the establishment doesn't like that. The establishment likes the status quo, because they like big government. They like unaccountable government, because what happens is that the big businesses and the big corporations and the special interests, they get everything they want. It doesn't matter whether Republicans or Democrats are in control. Those people that have their hand in your pocket, the people who continue to give contributions to the party, they're the people who get everything they want, because they're the ones that are controlling. And we want the people to control. We want to make sure that individual members are controlling and not the special interests.
About 2 weeks ago, Steve Millington happened to be visiting some family in Wyoming, and he came back and said in one of the Wyoming newspapers, he read, well, obviously it was an AP story, but your name was also floated for leadership, but not necessarily speaker, but perhaps to move into the whip role or majority leader. Are we going to see a wholesale change, and are you interested in one of those spots?
I don't think we're going to see a wholesale change. I've said this a couple of times in interviews. It's very difficult to lead the revolution and then stand up and run for a leadership position, because you have to realize that there's a lot of people here in Washington that are very upset with what we have done. The irony is that they're happy with their result. They're fine that Boehner is no longer the Speaker of the House. They're fine that we're getting new leadership. They're even advocating for the changes that we have made, that we're asking for in conference rules. But they're just happy they're unhappy that we did it the way we did it. But the reality is that there would have been no change if we hadn't gotten together as a group of conservatives and held the line and really fought for the principles that we promised our constituents we were going to fight for. But the reality is that you make a lot of enemies when you do that, and there's a lot of sore, upset people right now. That doesn't preclude me from doing something in the future, but there's absolutely no way that I can run for a leadership position today and win. And I'm just being realistic about that.
We've got about 90 seconds left. I don't mean to throw you a curveball, but happened to be talking to a merchant here in Twin Falls yesterday who's a big fan of the Paul family. And I have to confess that I've only ever given money to 2 campaigns in my life. One of those is Paul's, Rand Paul's campaign. The question, I guess, is what became of it?
Of the money or of the Paul campaign?
The campaign.
Well, actually,
where has he
if
been?
you look, just this week, there's been a couple of announcements. There's a new poll that came out where he's in 5th place. Rand has decided that he's going to do a really smart campaign, and he's just going to be moving inches instead of going for a home run. And if you look at all the latest polls, his poll numbers are going up. He's number 5 in number of donations. He's number 5 in the latest poll. if you look at the polling data between Rand Paul and Hillary Clinton, he's the one who performs the best against her in some of the key states that we have to win. So he's doing all the organization that you need to do in the early states. So I think it's too early to call this. There's no question that Donald Trump is sort of taking the oxygen out of the room. But I think he's doing all the things that are necessary to win the long game, and we need to make sure that people understand that if you're a supporter and if you want to be a supporter, that this thing is far from over.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you much for your time today, and we really do wish you best of luck. This is quite a noble cause going on in Washington, and we'd like to see some results, obviously, for the people.
Thank you very much.
Take care, sir.
All right, bye.
Congressman Raul Labrador joining us this morning on air. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 8:25 this morning on our program. Actually, I mentioned visiting a merchant in town yesterday, and we got talking a little bit about firearms and use of firearms. And, of course, a great many people here in Idaho own firearms because there's a huge tradition of hunting. There's also a huge tradition of self-defense. Speaking of hunting, and a lot of people right now are bringing in some game, and if you're doing that and you need some processing done, we would recommend you give them a call at High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, where they do one animal at a time. And what you bring in is exactly what you're going to get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner of High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, Idaho, he has more than 30 years' experience in the meat business. You can visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook and read reviews of other customers. Give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs. The number is 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking, and nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats such as jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, kielbasa, breakfast sausage, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and much more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. 734-9949. We were obviously curious about Paul Ryan's situation, and of course, Congressman Labrador says there will be no rush to enshrine this fellow as the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Ryan himself, speaking with media late yesterday, tell me, listen to this and see what you think. Does it sound like the man is issuing what you might call a diktat to his fellow House Republicans?
What I told members is, if you can agree to these requests, and if I can truly be a unifying figure, then I will gladly serve. And if I'm not unifying, that will be fine as well. I'll be happy to stay where I am at the Ways and Means Committee.
Then stay. It's just, if you do not agree to my terms, who do you think you are? They're offering to elevate you to. You'd be second in line to the presidency. You understand how that works. You've got the president, vice president, and if they both went down in a plane crash. Not that we're because you got to qualify that as a conservative radio host, because all of the liberal bloggers are out there immediately typing away saying, you know what he just called for? But the reason you have a Speaker of the House is somebody needs to be third in line just in case. So they're telling Paul Ryan, we will elevate you to a position where you are right behind the president in that line of succession. And Paul Ryan is saying, well, all right, but here's my conditions. You can't get rid of me if you decide to actually pick me. I don't know about you, but I think this is a time where that Freedom Caucus, which numbers 40, that's nearly a tenth of all members of the House of Representatives at the moment, plus you've got some Tea Partiers as well who might not quite be in the Freedom Caucus, and some other people who might be upset with leadership too. So you might be looking at 80, 85 Republicans. And you've got some Democrats who are now stepping forward saying, hey, we'll back Paul Ryan as well. What does that tell you? Well, they're making some political hay from it, but it tells you if they're comfortable with the man, then perhaps the rest of us should stand back. If we actually still believe in what that Freedom Caucus believes in, we need to stand back and we need to take another close look at this thing. There are 435 people who are serving in that House. 435. There's Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. She might be a possibility. There's Daniel Webster from Florida. You've got Congressman Labrador himself. You've got Jim Jordan from Ohio, who is his closest ally in the House right now. All of these people could be good possibilities. You can't tell me that you've got to settle on just one or two names that are being force-fed by the party establishment and by its allies in media. And many of those so-called allies are very temporary. They want to do what's best for their left-wing friends around Washington. And they believe right now that it's Paul Ryan. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 39. We've got Russell Singleton coming in just a moment, physician assistant from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls. He's talking the flu today. There's a pleasant subject, right? Well, he's actually talking prevention. And, of course, if you're looking to get a vaccine, it might not be a bad idea if you're especially in one of those risk groups. All that's coming up. Also, we have a guest, I believe, from City Hall dropping by. Coming up after 9 o'clock news this morning, right here on Top Story, on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.